favors, right? We managed to get him, right, to speak here in Singapore. He has an interesting background, right? Com science and economics from Cambridge, and then Japanese history as a first degree, right? Masters in com science. Yeah. So he is actually with KPMG now, formerly investment banker, IBM on the research side, and he is actually looking at entrepreneurism from the UK perspective, right? And he's actually quite well versed in the Bitcoin area. So I think as an exchange, I promised him that if he needs information on Singapore entrepreneur, we'll send to him, right? So that he can speak today on Bitcoin, right? Today we're not going to have a second session because his presentation will be 35 minutes, and I'll try to make it as open as possible for you guys to ask as many questions as possible. If we finish early, never mind. I hope pizza arrives, and we can have pizza after that, right? So, without further ado, I will pass it to Ravi, right, to give us an understanding of what Bitcoin is all about. Thank you very much, Ravi.
Thank you. Right, hello everyone, and thank you for letting me speak. I know it's the middle of Wednesday, the middle of the week, so Jack, I think it's going to lift our spirits for some pizza later, and you're stuck with me before pizza, so I'll try and make this as painless as possible. Now, just before I start, just by a show of hands, out of interest, how many people in the last week have done some online shopping? So bought goods or services online?
2 weeks ago.
Anyone? 2 weeks? Okay, the last month.
No ladies yet.
So a reasonable amount. I think in Singapore it's probably a bit less than we'd have in the UK, we'd have in America. How many people use online banking? Okay, so about half the room, a little bit more than half the room. How many people have used Bitcoin?
Not popular here.
Not popular here, no one. Right, that's absolutely fine, that's what I'd expect to see. So today, we're going to cover 3 questions. First of all, why does Bitcoin exist? What's the need for cryptocurrency? And to answer that, we're going to talk about the history of money, the history of currency, going back thousands and thousands of years. Second of all, how does Bitcoin work? So how does Bitcoin address the problems we've got in currency at the moment? And to answer that, we're going to cover a range of topics. We're going to talk about distributed computing, we're going to talk about cryptography, we're going to talk about blockchain, which you might have heard about, and we're going to talk about Bitcoin mining. So we're going to cover a lot of topics in a very short amount of time. And third of all, we're going to talk about what are the implications of all this. So what are the pros and cons of Bitcoin? Why do people use it? And more interesting for me, what about the underlying technology, in particular blockchain? So blockchain you'll have heard a lot about. There are many other uses of blockchain beyond Bitcoin, and we'll go into some of those. So we're going to dive straight in to our first question. Why does Bitcoin exist? And to answer this, we need to understand a little bit more about money and about the history of currency. So, early forms of money were what we called commodity currencies. Things that had intrinsic value, things like gold, things like salt. We'll talk about a few of these in a moment. And they were things that existed in the real world. And what that means is the supply of them is limited. There's only so much gold in the world, you have to go and mine it. It's actually quite difficult to get to. Now, there are many problems with commodity currencies, but they did have some benefits. And some of those benefits, Bitcoin picks up on. We'll talk about those. Over time, we've got rid of commodity currencies. We don't go around with gold coins in our pockets. We've replaced them by fiat currencies. And fiat currency, I've got an example here, £10 British note, it's just paper money. And the difference between fiat currency and commodity currency is a fiat currency is just issued by a central bank. It has value because the government says it has value. There's no intrinsic value, it's not mined, it's nothing in the real world, it is just a printed piece of paper. And we all agree to share these things that we call money. And fiat currencies are great, and there are many, many benefits of fiat currencies, but there are also some problems. There are 2 problems actually. One is there are some problems inherent in fiat currency, we'll talk about those, and Bitcoin overcomes many of those. And the second problem is when you put a fiat currency online, then you get some really interesting problems around fraud, around transaction costs, and Bitcoin addresses many of those. So let's dive into the history of money in a bit more detail. I'm going to start with commodity currencies. So some of you, if you like geography, if you like archaeology, you might have seen this picture before. Early Earlier this year, in Europe, archaeologists, I think one, discovered these salt mines in Provadia in Bulgaria. And this is thought to be the first ever settlement in Europe by humans, the first permanent settlement. And unlike other settlements we found from later in history, instead of having wooden fences around them and wooden walls, this was constructed of stone, really thick stone actually, which is really hard to get to. And the reason it was constructed of stone is because it was guarding one of the most precious commodities at the time, salt. Salt is really useful. It preserves meats. If you're a merchant, if you're a traveller, you need salt to stay alive to keep your food fresh. So, Provadia became a commerce centre for salt. And salt was used 6,500 years ago. It was used right up till the 14th century in China. When Marco Polo travelled to China, he talked about seeing great salt bricks being printed with the emperor's seal. And instead of exchanging bars of gold, they exchanged bars of salt. Salt was the currency of the day. Moving forwards about 4,500 years, a more common commodity currency you'll be aware of is gold. And gold's been used for thousands and thousands of years. I've just picked this from the Roman era. This is one of Emperor Hadrian's gold coins. Emperor Hadrian is my favourite Roman emperor because he built the wall between England and Scotland. And it's still there today, beautiful to walk along, highly recommend it. But the really interesting thing is that the Romans didn't just use gold. So the Roman warriors who guarded that wall, as well as being paid in gold and land, they also got little packages of salt. It was called their salarium. That's the Roman word, the Greek, so the Latin word for salt. And guess what? That's where we get the word salary from today. So many different kinds of commodities because they have to be used at the same time. I'm going to fast forward 1,000 years into the future from then. This is a rice stone from Yap. Believe it or not, this is the first attempt at making a Bitcoin. So it doesn't look like a Bitcoin. It doesn't look like much. But the people of Yap, they didn't have limestone on their island. So when they explored the other islands around them, it's currently Micronesia, they discovered this weird stone, limestone. They thought it was valuable in the same way we think gold's valuable. It was a rare commodity. So they decided, for reasons unknown to us, to carve out giant wheels of this stone. And some of these are 12 foot in diameter. So that's about 6 foot, my old span. So double that. Imagine a wheel that size, enormous. Some of these took 100 men to move. And they would carve these out, they would roll them all the way back on boats to the island of Yap, and they would plonk them in front of their houses or on the streets of the village, and that was their currency. So, I have one of these stones in front of my house, that's my currency. How do you spend it? You can't walk down to the market with this thing, you need 100 people to move it. So the way you spent it was actually quite simple. I'd walk down to the market, and I would go, Jack, I want to buy your crop from you. And in return for your crop, I'll give you the stone outside of my house. And let me just tell you a bit about that stone. That stone was mined 10 years ago over there. Before me, it was owned by this person. Before him, it was owned by this person. Chap, this stone is now yours. Everyone, did you hear that? And it would enter the common language, the common history of the Yap community. And because those transactions were remembered and recorded in the history, we all now know that Chap owns that stone. And that's really interesting because it means you don't actually need the stones. Once a stone was being transported across a river and there was an accident, it fell through the river onto the riverbed and it was completely irrecoverable. Everyone on the island agreed, the stone's still there, so why don't we keep transacting on it? So that stone was still used as currency right up to the start of the 20th century. And in fact, Yap stones, rice stones, are still used today for traditional purposes, for marriages. So I've dwelt on Yap stones for a fair bit because actually the way Yap stone works by transmitting ownership just by word of mouth through transaction is very similar to how Bitcoin works. We'll come back to that in a minute. Present day, many of you will have heard that the currency most favoured by prisons used to be cigarettes. Prisoners of war in the Second World War used to exchange cigarettes. Now it's ramen apparently. Who knew? Now, I said there are many, many problems with commodity currencies. Many problems. And there's a reason we do this today. But there are some benefits that we have lost in our current monetary system. The first one is the money supply is limited. If you're using gold, there's only so much gold and it's quite hard to get to. And generally, the amount of money in circulation increases at a diminishing rate and it controls inflation. The amount of money entering the economy is controlled by physical lack of that commodity. Second of all, it encourages exploration. Now, this isn't actually an intention of currency, but if gold is valuable, then it makes absolutely perfect sense to have a gold rush. So in 19th century America, thousands of prospectors travelled across the country, set up the west coast of America, and created gold mines, and that's the basis of where we've got Silicon Valley today, those settlements. And that's really important for Bitcoin. Bitcoin uses mining in a very similar way to encourage some very productive things to happen. We'll go on to that a little later in this. And finally, commodity currencies are generally internationally accepted without any transaction fees. When Marco Polo travelled from the west to the east, he could pay people with gold wherever he went. He didn't need to exchange for currency. Gold was recognised everywhere. Same with salt. Maybe less so with ramen noodles, but in prisons it works. Now, none of us use commodity currencies anymore, or very little at least. And countries started getting rid of their gold standards some time ago. In Britain, we got rid of the gold standard in 1931. And a few decades after that, our old Prime Minister Gordon Brown decided to sell gold at an all-time low price. If you'd have travelled in the UK about 6 years ago during our general election, you've seen this poster by his political rivals, the Conservative Party, lambasting him for selling this gold so cheap. And instead of having that physical gold, what we have today, we've got banknotes. I've got one here, and on the banknote, on every banknote issued by the UK and by the Federal Reserve, there is a promise. It says on the British banknote, I promise to pay the bearer of this note on demand the sum of £10. And once upon a time, that meant I could go to the Bank of England, I could give them my note, and they would give me an equivalent amount of gold. We don't have that anymore. The money itself is the value. So the Bank of England is making a promise to me that that is the value. The value of the currency is in law, it's in the British Constitution. That's where the value derives from. Nothing more than trust. And that's fine, it has some benefits. It means that governments can control money supply, and it means that you can smooth out dips and recessions in the economy. However, I said there are two problems with fiat currencies. The first one is, what if you don't trust the government? And for many people in the world, Zimbabwe is a great example. There is a very good reason not to trust the government. This is a Zimbabwe $100 trillion note. These entered regular circulation, they were very common, and in fact by the time they'd been delivered, they were almost worthless. They decided to print more currency of different denominations, and by the time that currency arrived, they'd run out of money to pay for the ink. Yeah, this was a complete economic catastrophe. The government just printed money to pay people, caused hyperinflation, and by the end of this period, or actually halfway through, in July 2008, a monthly war pension, so the amount of pension that a war veteran would get in Zimbabwe every month was 100 billion Zimbabwean dollars. So they would get 100 billion Zimbabwean dollars, which sounds great, but that was about 70 American cents. Oh, and by the way, because of hyperinflation, that would be worth 50 American cents a few weeks later. So you had to spend it pretty quick. If you wrote a check in Zimbabwe, you had to write a check for double the amount you were paying, because by the time that check cleared, it would be worth half as much. So fiat money has real problems where you don't trust governments. Fiat money also has problems when you use it online. So the first biggest problem of online transactions for merchants is chargeback. So if I buy something on Amazon and then I phone up my bank a few weeks later and say, that was a fraudulent transaction, I didn't make that, they charge the money back and someone has to bear that cost. And that single thing is why Bitcoin was first created. If you read the original paper by Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, that's the first paragraph. There is this problem with chargebacks, we're trying to solve it. But there are other problems that Bitcoin solves as well. There are transaction fees, there are currency conversion fees, transactions can be intercepted and taxed when you send money, and you can have online theft. And just to talk about how those fees add up, this is a real example from Indiegogo. Many of you will be familiar with it. To transfer money to Indiegogo takes about 8% transaction fee. If I is their fee, some of which will be paid to handle your money and the transactions associated with that. And there's credit card fees, there's wire fees. This amount goes up. In fact, it goes up to about 10% if you use paper. So transaction fees online are a huge problem. So, why is all of this relevant to Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin manages to take some of those benefits from commodity currencies and do away with the inherent problems of fiat currencies like hyperinflation, and makes it easier to transact online without the transaction fees or without chargeback. So that's why Bitcoin exists. Next question I posed is, how does Bitcoin work? Now, this part of the presentation is quite technical. Please feel free to ask any questions if anything is unclear. There is no such thing as a stupid question. If anything is unclear, it is my fault, not yours, not understanding. So, how does Bitcoin work? At its heart, Bitcoin is really simple. There is this green box called a ledger. And a ledger is a list of all the Bitcoin users in the world and how many Bitcoins they've got. Really simple, and I'll show you exactly how that works a little bit later. And if I want to make a transaction, so I want to send money to someone, that's really simple as well. All I do is I write out a transaction, and that is exactly what the transaction looks like in Bitcoin. I'm Alice, I want to send Bob some money, I want to send him specifically 10 Bitcoins, and I send that transaction to the distributed network, and everyone updates their ledgers. And now everyone in the world knows that Bob has those 10 Bitcoins, I don't have them anymore. Sounds really simple, but how does it work? There are problems here. How do you know that transaction is really from Alice? Anyone could have fraudulently created that transaction. Second of all, how do you account for double spending? So what happens if Alice tries to pay two people at the same time with the same Bitcoin? How do you stop that happening? And actually, fixing that problem means that if you didn't fix that problem, the ledgers could become out of sync. Those ledgers that copy network could look different. And finally, where do Bitcoins actually come from? What are they? So we're going to go on to these two questions. Okay. So, by the way, I'm going to tell you 3 lies in this segment. The first lie I've just told you. Remember I said the orange box was what a transaction looks like? That's not what a transaction looks like. The transaction actually has a little bit attached to the end, that yellow box at the end. And what that yellow box is it's a signature, a digital signature that proves that Alice is the one sending that transaction. Okay? So when you send out a Bitcoin transaction, you say Alice is going to pay Bob 10 Bitcoin, and here is Alice's signature to prove this is really from Alice. Now, how does that work? How do you get a digital signature? So I told you we're going to cover a lot of topics today. So cryptography 101. The first thing you do when you create a Bitcoin wallet is you create what's called a public key and a private key. Now, I prefer to think of it as a public key and a private lock. And what those are is they're complementary numbers. They're 2 very, very long numbers. And you use your private lock to encrypt data. So it's an encryption algorithm in Bitcoin, and all you do is you give it the data you want to encrypt, like a transaction, and you say, here is my lock, encrypt it with that lock, and that data is locked. And the public key is the only way to unencrypt that data. So if you use the public key on data that's used on your private lock, it will decrypt it, and you will get back to the original message. Okay? Now, crucially, that private lock is something you keep, you never share. It is a number, so you can write it down on paper, you can store it on a hard disk offline, you can store it on a shared online wallet if you choose to. But that is something that is personal to you and only you know. The public key is known by everyone. The reason it's known by everyone is because that is basically your email address, it's your bank account number on Bitcoin. So when we say Alice is sending Bob money, actually what's happening is an email address, a public key, is sending money to another public key. And in that way, Bitcoin is anonymous. No one knows who Alice is, no one knows who Bob is. All they see is one bank account sending money to another bank account. Let's just talk through that, because it's not the most intuitive thing if you haven't seen it before. So, Alice wants to send Bob 10 Bitcoin, so she creates that transaction message. She then uses the encryption algorithm with her private lock. So creates this very long number, which we call a digital signature, and she sends that along with the transaction. And I'm someone else on the Bitcoin network, and I want to check whether that was really Alice sending those Bitcoins. What I do is I take the signature, I decrypt it using the public key. Remember, the public key is just Alice's name, it's her email address, it's a bank account number. I just take it straight from there, and it should decrypt to that same transaction. If anyone has tampered with any of the code in this, if anyone has inserted bits into the transaction or into the signature, it will come out as garbage. Only that lock can unlock that key, and only that key can unlock the lock, and only that lock can create messages that are unlocked by that key. Okay, there's a lot of mathematics behind this. If you want to learn more, Google elliptic curve cryptography. Really interesting area for people who are kind of mathematically inclined. So, we've solved the problem of checking that transaction is real and that it's come from Alice. However, what we haven't checked is when Alice is sending those Bitcoins, does she really own those Bitcoins? Does she have 10 Bitcoins to send? What are Bitcoins? So I said I'd tell you 3 lies in a second. So the second lie I told you was, remember how I said a transaction looks like an orange box with a yellow signature? Actually, a transaction is a little bit more complex than that. This is actually, honestly, what a transaction looks like. So a transaction has 3 components. It has inputs. So Alice, in her transaction, she says, last week, Raj sent me 6 Bitcoins. And the week before that, Chan, he sent me 5 Bitcoins. So I've got these 11 Bitcoins, guys. And what I want to do is I want to give 10 of those Bitcoins to Bob. And there's one change, because I started with 11, I'm giving 10 away. So I'll take that one change from me, so the one goes back to Alice. And those are the outputs. And here's the signature to prove it's me. Okay? Now, just 3 points to know on this. So first of all, the transactions, every transaction in Bitcoin references previous transactions where the money has come from. Okay? Think back to that rye-stone example. When you're given a coin, a rye-stone, you're told where it came from. You might not even know where that stone is, it might be at the bottom of the sea, but you know it's come from somewhere. The recipients of Bitcoins are stated in the outputs. So here Bob is getting 10, Alice is getting 1. But more interestingly, the outputs, there's actually a scripting language in Bitcoin. So you can make the outputs really complex. So instead of just saying I'm giving Bob 10 Bitcoins, you can set it up so it's an escrow service. So I will give Bob 10 Bitcoins, but only when someone else agrees to it. And you can write your own scripts for this. You can make it really, really complex. You can say when 2 out of 3 parties agree that this money should be paid, then it will be paid. It's quite risky to try and write these scriptures up. Once someone lost 2,500 Bitcoins by writing the script wrong, those Bitcoins are gone forever. That is about, I think, current level is about $1 million worth of Bitcoins has just disappeared from the network. It will never be found because it's been given to an address that doesn't exist and no one has the private key, the private lock with which to now move that currency on to someone else. Okay. Right, so each transaction in the Bitcoin world references previous transactions. So when Alice sent 10 Bitcoins to Bob, it referenced a transaction that sent 6 Bitcoins from Raj to Alice. And that transaction referenced 3 Bitcoins going from Ali to Raj and 3 Bitcoins going from Charlotte to Raj. And those transactions referenced earlier and earlier transactions, all the way back to the beginning of Bitcoin. Create this transaction tree. So every transaction links to the last. And that is what the ledger is. So remember we said there's a distributed ledger around the world that everyone's got? What the ledger contains is the list of every transaction that has ever happened with Bitcoin in the history of Bitcoin. About 20 million transactions on that ledger roughly the last time I checked. Now, this has some really interesting implications. First of all, Bitcoins only exist on the ledger. So think about that rhinestone at the bottom of the sea. It might as well not exist. Bitcoins don't exist. Bitcoins are not bits of code. Bitcoins are not physical objects. Bitcoins only exist because there is a transaction chain showing how a Bitcoin has moved from person to person. You're going to ask, so where did the Bitcoin come from to start with? Where did that transaction begin? We'll come on to that when we talk about mining. Second thing is, while everyone on Bitcoin, if they choose to remain so, is anonymous, every single transaction is public. every single transaction ever made by Bitcoin is on a public ledger that anyone can see. And that has some really interesting implications. There have been some occasions where research scientists have looked at the list of transactions and you can spot patterns. You spot this person keeps getting lots of small payments in and they keep giving it to that person's Bitcoin wallet, and you see behaviours emerging. It's quite interesting science. Okay, so if you want to go into Bitcoin, the first thing you do is you download that latest transaction ledger. And here's the thing, in Bitcoin you trust no one. There is no trust in the central government and central monetary authority. So the first thing you do when you download that transaction ledger is you check every single transaction to make sure the signature matches the public key being referenced in that transaction, to make sure the transactions are real. And you check all 20 million back to day zero, and at the moment that takes over 24 hours to do. When you get a new transaction, there are two things you must do. You must check that the signature matches the sender, so that it's a real transaction, it's not a fraudulent transaction. But the second thing you must do is check that the inputs to that transaction haven't been spent in a previous transaction. So we saw earlier that Alice was trying to spend Bitcoins that Raj and that Shola had given her. You need to check that those transactions haven't been used as an input for an earlier transaction, i.e. the Bitcoin hasn't been spent before. And in theory, you need to check all 2 million transactions. Actually, it's a bit quicker than that. What you do is you index all the unspent transactions, so you do it quite quickly. Finally, working out your own Bitcoin balance is actually quite interesting. What you need to do is go through all 2 million transactions, look for any transactions where you have been given Bitcoins, and make sure those transactions haven't been spent by you at a later date, and add all of them up, and that's your balance. It's not easy to get to, right? Very, very different from existing currencies. Now, I said I'd tell you 3 lies. There's a slight lie. That's not actually what the ledger looks like. The ledger is slightly more complex than that. The ledger is split up into blocks. Okay? So instead of just having one really long list of transactions, you split the transactions into blocks. And here we've got block 1, block 2, block 3. Now, there's a reason you do that. I'll give you a quick explanation now, then I'll show you an example of it on the next slide. The reason you do that is, imagine you just had a ledger that was a list of transactions. And people are firing transactions left, right, and centre, and different parts of the world, different networks, are getting those transactions in different orders. So if I try and spend money on one transaction over here, and I try and spend that same Bitcoin on another transaction over here, the ledgers are going to fall out of sync. And that will be a huge problem. The ledgers have to be in sync. And to fix that, we use blocks. Each block contains 3 bits of information. First of all, it links to the last block. So I've got block number 3 there, and it says the last block before me is block number 2, and that says the last block before me is block number 1. That's a chain, and this is why it's called a blockchain. The blocks chain together, and they create an order. Second thing you've got is you've got the transactions that form part of that block, so a list of transactions. And finally, we've got this really odd thing called a nonce. A nonce is a random number. We'll talk about why the nonce is in there in a couple of slides' time. But let's go back to the question, why would we split down the transaction list into blocks? How does that fix the double spending problem? So imagine Alice is trying to commit fraud. So she wants to pay Bob 10 Bitcoins in America, and she wants to pay Bert in Australia with 10 Bitcoins, and she sends out both transactions, and they both have the same sets of inputs. She's trying to double spend money. So the question is, we've got our 3 blocks there. Which transaction goes into the 4th block? Does Bob get that money, or does Bert get that money? Well, as a starter, all of those new transactions go into a cloud, unconfirmed transactions, and all the Bitcoin computers in the world have these unconfirmed transactions. And then a race begins. It's a competition. It really is a competition. Right, and this is where it gets really technical. So, the competition works like this. There is an algorithm, just a mathematical function, that takes the last block number, it takes a list of transactions, and it takes into that algorithm spits out a number. Now the algorithm, for those who are interested, it's called the SHA-256 algorithm. It's a hashing algorithm. And the interesting thing about it is, if you put a load of information into that algorithm, it spits out a number. So it spits out the number 27 million. If you change that number, change the input very slightly, it might spit out a completely different number, like 2. Then you change it slightly again, it'll spit out 573,291. The point is, you can never predict what the output is going to be based on the input. You have to just run it through the algorithm, which takes a fraction of a second, very quick calculation. So, how does this competition work? All the Bitcoin computers in the world try and create a new block. And what they do is they go, right, I'm going to construct a block. The last block was block number 3. I'm going to take in some transactions, and I can pick any ones I want. I can decide, I really like Bob, I want Bob to get some money. Bob's going to be that next transaction. I can decide, I want to work on the biggest transactions. I can decide, I only want to process my own transactions. It is entirely up to you. And I'm going to run that block through the algorithm. And here's the competition. I need to find a random number of nonce, so that when I run it through the algorithm, the output is less than a particular target. So the output that comes out is less than the number 10, for example. So I run my block with the nonce set as the number 1 through the algorithm, and I get an answer of 27 million. Well, I didn't win. I need to get a target of less than 10, remember. So now I try changing the nonce to the number 2. I run it through, and I get the number 53. Great, I'm getting closer to being less than 10, right? Change it to being the number 4. Oh, now I'm back up at 270,000. Change it to number 5. And you don't know what the answer is going to be until you run it through. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to try random numbers from 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up, until finally I find a number that when I pass it through that algorithm, gets me an output lower than the target. And that target is quite intelligently defined. The target is set so that on average it will always take 10 minutes, all of the world's computers, for one of them to come up with a block that works. The way it does that, by the way, is every 2 weeks, all of the Bitcoin computers in the world look back over the last 2 weeks. They go, how long is it taking for people to crack the next block? It's taking 8 minutes now because computer power's got better over the last 2 weeks. Right, we're going to lower that target. We're going to make the target narrow and make it harder. And conversely, if half the world has a power cut and it gets twice as difficult to find a block, they'll make that target bigger, target range bigger. So, just to reiterate that, every Bitcoin computer in the world tries to create a new block. But the only way to create a new block that wins the competition, that gets a number less than target, is by trying lots and lots of random numbers. There's no intelligence in it, you literally just try random numbers. And finally, after about 10 minutes, at the moment it takes about 900 quintillion tries to get a number that works, someone in the world will crack it. Sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's shorter. On average, it takes about 10 minutes. So, I'm really lucky. I cracked it. My Bitcoin computer was the one that worked. So my block, I distribute it around the world. I send it out to all the different Bitcoin ledgers. And I say, right, accept that as the next block. You can check that this works, because if you run the algorithm with that last block under those transactions and that nonce, it hits the target. It's lower than the target. Right. So everyone in the world adds that to their ledger, their blockchain. Bob's transaction goes through, but poor old Bert, who Alice was trying to pay, his transaction just disappears because everyone can then see, it's got an input that's already been used in the transaction with Bob. So that's how blockchain works. Now, if you're really acute, you might go, but hold on a second. There's a problem with this. What happens if 2 people create blocks at the same time? Don't we have exactly the same problem as we had with 2 transactions? We've got the same problem we were trying to solve. Now, while it's incredibly rare for this to happen, it can happen. And I won't go into details, it's slightly complex, but what happens is you can, at the end of a blockchain, have 2 or 3 actually different variants around the world, where different people have a last block on the end of their blockchain. But what will eventually happen is one of those blockchains will grow before another one. And it's that one that's the longest that gets adopted around the world by everyone. So what that means is you should never trust the last block, because the last block might solve the competition at the same time. That has some really important implications, by the way. So it takes 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes for a transaction to get onto the blockchain to be approved. And even when it's approved, you should wait a little bit longer until a few more blocks have been built up, just to confirm that it is the best blockchain you can have. And the general rule of thumb is if you're transacting £1 million or $1 million or more, you should wait at least 6 blocks. That's 6 times 10 minutes, that's 1 hour before that transaction goes through. It's a real problem with Bitcoin. Other cryptocurrencies, like Litecoin, they have 2.5 minutes between blocks being created. But Bitcoin decided on 10 minutes for whatever reason. Okay. Right. We're almost at the end of the technical point of this. Let's just recap. No trust is needed in any of this. So, when a transaction is sent, you use public-private cryptography to make sure that transaction is real. That's great. Transactions all refer to previous transactions, and you can check all of those previous transactions so you know people aren't double spending the same money that's been spent before. And transactions are ordered on those blockchains. And blockchains are really, really difficult to make. It takes 900 quintillion goes to try and get one, with all of the world's Bitcoin computers, millions of them working at once. No single person can hope to crack a blockchain in their lifetime. It takes years and years. So getting a new blockchain is proof that the whole network has been working to try and solve that mathematical competition. But where do Bitcoins come from? That's the one question I haven't answered yet. So, just think about it for a second. We've got all these Bitcoin computers around the world trying to validate transactions and create a new block. Why? Why does anyone bother? Why do I turn my computer on and waste my electricity validating transactions for someone else? And the answer is that if you win the competition, if you are the one who creates that new block, you get rewarded with Bitcoin. And at the moment, if you win the blockchain, you get 12.5 Bitcoin. So at the moment, a Bitcoin is worth about $600 American dollars. So that's good money. That's thousands of dollars. $7,500. So that incentivizes people to do the verification process. Remember how I said that with commodity currencies like gold, you had the gold rush. People went out to West Coast America to mine for gold. This is the same. By giving people Bitcoins for solving the competition, for finding gold, for finding that new block, you are paying them indirectly for this. Great. Now the reward, that 12.5 Bitcoins you get, halves every few years. So initially when Bitcoin was set up, you were rewarded with 50 Bitcoins. Then a few years later it was halved to 25 Bitcoins. Now it's 12.5. In a few years time it will become 6.25, then it will become 3, and then less and less and less. And it will keep getting halved as an amount. And that is Bitcoin's way of managing inflation. The number of units of Bitcoin is controlled at a reducing rate. We'll see the exact graph of how many Bitcoins there are in a minute. At the moment, 16 million Bitcoins are in existence, but in about 100 years' time, 2140, no more Bitcoins will ever be mined. And the amount of Bitcoins, in fact, won't stay stable, the amount of Bitcoins will become deflationary, because you can lose Bitcoins. Remember that guy who lost 2,000 Bitcoins by getting some computer code wrong? Bitcoins will be lost over time. Here's a real graph showing the number of Bitcoins in existence. It goes from 2009, when there were no Bitcoins, all the way up to today. And over time, if you project that forward, the curve will smooth, it'll hit a plateau, and then it will start to decrease very slowly. And that, in a nutshell, is how Bitcoin works. You're stunned into silence. A lot of context. Any questions on that before we talk about the implications of Bitcoin?
Does it mean, you have looked through all the transactions, right, to really look at how much Bitcoin you own? Is there a limitation? Because as more and more people go in, you need more and more computing power to really, scan the whole entire ledger.
Right, yeah, really good question. So the computing power required to check all of the transactions that came before you was that 24-hour period. So there are a few ways around that. When you set up a Bitcoin wallet, you've got two choices. Either you can set up your computer as a Bitcoin computer and it will do mining and it will do validation. Or you can use an online service, you can use an online wallet, and that will store your private key and that will take online wallet will not be hacked. And it has happened. In Japan last year, you had Mt. Gox, one of the biggest Bitcoin exchanges in the world. Someone got into there, hacked all the private keys, and stole them, so the private locks, as I call them, stole them, and has now got control of all those Bitcoins. Happened earlier this year with another exchange. So it is a big problem, it is a big limitation. In theory, as computing power grows and as the transaction ledger grows, that 24 hours should remain constant. So it's really kind of your choice. But you are buying an ecosystem in a way you're not when you have a pound note or a $1 note in your hand. Much easier.
For the target, is there been a chance where someone gets to the target within the first few tries, in a minute?
Yes, I'm sure it has happened. So how quickly is someone hit the target? I'm sure it has happened that it's happened in seconds. I don't know what the quickest one ever is. It'd be really interesting to find out. And there have been times where it's taken absolutely ages to hit targets. So 10 minutes is the average.
What is the purpose of limiting the Bitcoin? I understand it controls inflation, governments cannot print money, but at 60 million Bitcoins and unlimited goods and services in the world,
Right.
there's only a small country that can use it.
Yes, really good question. Really good question. So Bitcoins are divisible. So you can split one Bitcoin into 100 million bits. So 100 million decimal. Sorry, so 100 million. And each one of those bits is called a Satoshi. You know, like Sing dollars, you've got cents, you've got Bitcoin, you've got Satoshis, and 100 million Satoshis make the whole. So at some point in the distant future, you're absolutely right. We'll get to the point where one Satoshi is now worth too much to transact on. It's like having a company share that's worth $1 million. You know, what do you do with it because no one can afford it anymore? But that's in the very, very distant future. A long time ago now that becomes a problem.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the. Come back to me, sorry.
I'll come back to you. Yeah, we've got one more section.
If it takes so long, I do online transactions, it's going to take forever to get through my payments, right? That's one of the challenges.
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest problems for me personally with Bitcoin. So a transaction to get approved takes at least 10 minutes. If you are not in that block, you might have to wait till the next block before your transaction is approved. So that's 20 minutes. And if you're sending a large amount of money, you want to wait until several blocks are there because Bitcoin can be, the blockchain can be unstable for a few chains back. So I think that's a real problem. Bitcoin aficionados who use this stuff regularly will say that is a very small price to pay for never having to worry about fraud or chargeback. But that's one for you to decide upon.
The transactions were, I mean, the ledger is public, but transactions are private, is that right?
No, so the ledger, the blockchain, has every transaction. Right. And that is completely public. Anyone can see that.
Right.
But what those transactions are, when Alice is giving Bob money, all you see is Alice's and Bob's public keys, their bank account numbers, their email addresses,
Right.
which are random numbers.
Right.
So the transaction of this bank account giving this bank account money is completely visible, but you don't know who owns those bank accounts.
Right.
It's just anonymous, all the transactions are completely visible.
And does the ledger track the actual Bitcoin as in like a, you know, that I'm not sure how Bitcoin is tracked, but is it that so every Bitcoin is traced, as in like you can track it back all the way?
So, yes, but not in the way you think.
Okay.
So,
I'm just thinking about that
Yeah.
that heist where they
yeah, really good question. Really good question. Right. So go back to the blockchain. So this is actually what the ledger looks like. So what you can do. So there's no Bitcoin. So if you're looking at Bitcoin, there's no such thing as a Bitcoin, a piece of code. What there is I know that the most recent transaction, Chan gave Alice 5 Bitcoins. And looking at that transaction, I can trace that transaction back to when someone gave it to Chan. I can trace it back to when someone else gave it to that person, and back, you know, all the way to the point when it was mine. Now the only way to do that is to check all the transactions to find the right link through it. So there's no place where it says here is a Bitcoin and here is its life. The life of Bitcoin is distributed amongst that blockchain.
Okay, so that means that this robbery or this heist that they've had, my question about what happens beyond that. So they've got the Bitcoin.
Great question.
Right. How do you use
Yeah.
it?
So imagine I've got Bitcoin validated, it's on the blockchain forever. Right? There is no recourse. There is no central bank to go to. I cannot have that transaction reversed. There is nothing you can do. That's it. It is irreversible. And this was the reason Bitcoin was created, to stop reversibility, but it's also a huge limitation. Because in normal banking systems, if you have a fraudulent transaction, you can get your money back. That's probably right. My question about
can you talk a little bit about how the blockchains are synced up? Because you're saying that you should trust the very ends.
yes.
Basically, the formula with the random tournaments is really to create this, I guess, create an artificial delay so that you can, I guess, not have simultaneous transactions. One aspect of fraud is all the spending and stuff like that. But how does the blockchain sync up? Like if it ever goes without sync?
Great question, right? How does it work? So that is the one thing I haven't put on this slide because I thought we'd run out of time. Actually, I don't think. How good are we on time?
We're right.
We're great, right? So let's talk about that for a moment. Right. Let's look at this slide. Right. So we've got a blockchain here, and the last block on the chain, Alice has given Bob some money. But imagine that at the same time block number 4 was made, someone else in the world cracked the code, they won the competition at the same time. And on their computer, block 4 looks different. It shows Alice giving Bert the money. We now have 2 different versions of the blockchain, and different computers around the world, and when they receive that blockchain, will have one of those 2 different versions in existence. Then we start the competition again to create block number 5. And some people are creating block number 5 based on the Bob version receiving. Some people are trying to create block number 5 based on the Bert version that someone else has. And one of those guys will win. At some point, someone will create a block 5 that works. They will send that out to the network, and they will say, here's block 5, it works. And for those people who are already working on, let's say block 5 was built off the Bob version, this version, people already working on the Bob version go, that's great, it fits, it's got the right reference to the right block before, I'll plug that in. But people who are working on the Bert version go, hold on, your block 5 refers to a different block 4 than I have. The blocks have reference numbers. I call them block 1, 2, 3, 4. They've actually all got unique reference numbers. The unique reference is wrong. So that means my blockchain is the wrong blockchain. You've got a longer blockchain than me. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to scrap my block 4. I'll take your block 4 that you built that block 5 off. I'll insert it. Obviously, I'll validate that they fulfilled the target. And at that point, everyone in the world is then working on the same blockchain again. However, there is an issue here. So, the whole point of Bitcoin is you assume the majority of computing power on the network is friendly. At least 50% is working in the spirit of Bitcoin. If one user has more than half the power of the network, what they could do is they could get everyone to work away creating their blockchains and create a very big blockchain. Behind the scenes, create a bigger block, because they've got more than half the computing power, so they're going to win this competition more times. And then, after a load of transactions have happened, launch their new massive block into the network and go, I've got a bigger block, guys. While you've been working on that, I've created this block. Look at me, you should adopt my block. And that leaves it really open to fraud, because what you can do is you can send a load of transactions, get a load of money, and then undo all of those transactions in your new block. Now, what prevents that from happening? First of all, every second, 1.5 quintillion calculations are tried to create a new block. So if you want to beat that system, you need computer power to do at least 1.5 quintillion calculations a second on average. And you need a bit of luck as well on top of that. No one has that sort of power. But it has happened once before. There are syndicates of people who group together to try and mine Bitcoin. So me on my little laptop here, there's no way I would ever win a blockchain, right? Against the computer bank server somewhere. So what I do is I team up with a load of other people. All you people, get your laptops out. We link them all up and we use the combined processing power of all of our computers. There is one syndicate that has about 1/6 of the entire computing power, processing power on the Bitcoin network. And there was one period in history where they managed to win that competition 6 times in a row. Absolutely unprecedented. With 1/6 of the power, they just got really lucky. Now, they couldn't really have used that for fraud because they were playing by the rules. They were distributing all the blocks as they produced them, and they were adding to everyone's chain. They weren't usurping those blocks. But they could have done. But it would be quite hard to plan that because they would have to have known that they were going to win eventually. Otherwise, there'd have been millions of pounds out of pocket if they lost it. Does that answer your question? It's quite a technical one. Really good question, but very technical.
Sorry, I'm very new to Bitcoins, but just hearing a bit what you say, sounds to me it's just a game.
It's just a game.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it is just a game. It is a mathematical competition. You're exactly right.
But the Bitcoins is equivalent to no currency, no money.
That's right. So this is the heart of currency, right? So why does my £10 note, why can I pay for anything with this? And the reason is that everyone in England, we all agree that this is worth some money, and it's worth a particular number of potatoes, and I can exchange it for some potatoes. Why is a block of gold worth any money? Because on the world economy, we all agree that an ounce of gold is worth about $1,000 US, and that's what we transact it for, and that price goes up and down. And currency values go up and down. Bitcoin is exactly the same. Bitcoin is only valuable because the people who use it agree it has value. And as more people want Bitcoin, the value of it goes up, and as fewer people use Bitcoin, the value of it goes down, just like gold or just like the value of the pound.
So, but the goal is something that is like
Tangible.
tangible, but because it's like created up in the cloud or something like that.
It's created out of the
It's
cloud.
like in a dream, it's creating something.
She meant virtual.
So, how is this created?
Printed.
It's printed, and in the last year since the financial crisis, the Bank of England has printed billions of new pounds and just thrown them out at banks, thrown them out of the economy. So is the US Treasury.
How do you classify the transactions?
How do you mean, sorry?
You say there is transactions and you use it for is in the game itself, or use it as a business thing.
So-
I'm very new to it. So
No, that's fine. So,
Yeah.
so transactions work like any other currency. Okay.
Yeah.
So I give you £10 or 10 bitcoins, and you give me a service. The way the game works is the game is a way of validating that transaction wasn't fraudulent, that it was really me giving you the money, and a way of maintaining a global ledger around the world, so that we don't have one central bank or one bank that holds all of the information in one place. There are pros and cons of that. I don't use Bitcoin, by the way, very regularly. So.
it is like because there's a limitation up to about 21 million, it's limited and it's no longer creating.
That's right.
So the one who created Bitcoins ultimately will be the winner, isn't it?
So this is a really interesting point. So Bitcoin mining, it really rewards early adopters. Because early adopters, remember, if you're an early adopter and you solved the blockchain, you got 50 Bitcoins. Now you only get 12.5. In the year 2140, you will get 0. So, if you're getting 0 Bitcoins, why would you bother validating any transactions and adding them to the blockchain? And the answer is, at some point in the future, Bitcoin miners will demand a transaction fee. So when Alice says, here's a transaction that has 11 Bitcoins as an input, I'm going to give 10 to Bob, and the one left over goes to whichever Bitcoin miner cracks the next blockchain and puts my transaction on the blockchain. And a little bit of that happens at the moment. The transaction fees are tiny though, they are absolutely minuscule compared to the 8% we saw for Indiegogo earlier. But you're right, there is a problem. When you hit 2140, first of all, you have to divide the Bitcoin more and more. This gentleman at the front was asking about how do you divide that? Well, you can divide each Bitcoin into 100 million different parts. So that doesn't become an issue for so long. But transaction fees will creep in. And remember I said, when I'm trying to find a new block for the blockchain, I can pick what transactions go on there. I will be incentivized to pick the transactions that give me the biggest fee.
So this is virtual. So it does when there is something happen into the whole system, so your currencies, whatever Bitcoins that you have, will be virtually offline. Am I correct?
So the question is, what happens if there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
What happens if there's an electronic problem?
Not
Now,
just electronic or virus or something.
Virus,
like
yeah.
that, something.
Okay. So in normal practice, that's not an issue. If the whole of America loses electricity, it doesn't matter, because there are millions of versions of the ledger on different computers around the world. However, there is a problem. If someone cracks the algorithm, someone finds out a way to find your private key, a private lock that opens the public key. However, if that day comes, you should all be terrified, because that's how all electronic information is secured. So your online bank uses exactly the same process for its transactions, for its encryption. When you send money over the internet, and buy things over the internet, when you use online banking, it uses public-private key cryptography. Now, as far as we know, there is no mathematical way to crack that. But there may come a day when someone much smarter than me, in a lab somewhere doing maths research, finds a way to crack it. It's all about prime number factorization. At the moment, we don't know of any way to do that. We believe it is a one-way transaction, but you're right. There is a huge risk to all commerce online, all digital transactions. If someone can find a quick way to do that, then we have to completely rethink the way we distribute money online. Really good question. I have one more question, then I'll move this on.
I just missed your explanation towards the end about how you're saying that the later adopters won't be getting any bitcoins as they mine. What was the incentive that you talked about?
It's transaction fees.
Okay,
So how does Bitcoin do transaction fees? Right, so this is a transaction. I remember I said that the output here could be complex, like an escrow service. What you do is if I want a transaction to be verified in the future, after the year 2140, I will say, Bob will take 10 Bitcoins, I will take half a Bitcoin as change as Alice, and half a Bitcoin will go to whichever miner adds that transaction to the blockchain. I.e., I'm giving you half a Bitcoin transaction fee. And at that point, Bitcoin becomes very egalitarian. Whoever will pay the biggest fee is more likely to get onto the blockchain. Transactions where you don't offer the miner a fee probably won't. But the fee should still be much less than a bank can offer you. Real problem. Right. I'm going to move this on just in the interest of time, and we'll have plenty of time to catch up over pizza. So very quickly then, what are the implications of Bitcoin? Let's talk about the pros and the cons. So there are some very clear benefits of Bitcoin. Security. There is no trust required. Everything is proven by public-private cryptography. Everything can be checked on the blockchain. When you start Bitcoin mining, you check every transaction since the year zero. You don't need to trust anyone. No security required. There are no transaction fees at the moment. And when transaction fees, originally this slide actually did say no/low transaction fees, but even when transaction fees are required in the future, they should be significantly lower than bank fees. No third-party seizure. If I've got a bank account and the government wants to seize that, really easy. They phone up the bank and say, lock this account, they seize it. You can't do that with Bitcoin. My bank account is on millions of computers around the world on this ledger, on the blockchain. Bitcoins themselves cannot be stolen. That Bitcoin is assigned to whoever has the private lock that works with that public key that it's assigned to. Transactions are irreversible. So if you're a merchant accepting Bitcoin, it's great. Because as soon as your transaction is on the blockchain with a stable coins, it can never be taken back by chargeback, by fraud. It's anonymous, so there's no tracking. So you set up your public and your private keys, and no one else will ever know who you are. And inflation is controlled, so the bank cannot just print loads of money like Zimbabwe. But there are some real problems, and many of these have been picked up on. First one is, it is not widely accepted. Most people do not accept Bitcoins. Why would you? We've got perfectly good fiat money. I said fiat money is great. Fiat money has lots of uses. One of the things that's nice is it's generally pretty widely accepted. Second of all, it's got a really volatile value. So, back to that question. The value can surge from a few dollars per Bitcoin to $1,000 per Bitcoin, or anywhere in between. At the moment, it's about 600. That will only stabilise when it's used more and more by people. But it's quite technical. Most people probably won't want to use it ever. Because Bitcoin is completely anonymous and it can't be seized, it is used by a lot of criminals for illegal activity. They're probably the biggest users of the network. We'll never know because the users are anonymous. But lot of drug dealers use Bitcoin to transfer money across borders because they can't be stopped, it can't be seized, it can't be traced. It's really easy, right? Do you want to use a currency with a predominant user as a drug dealer? Probably not. Probably. The verification time, so it takes 10 minutes for a transaction to get onto the blockchain, and for big transactions you might wait for several blocks to be created before you are absolutely sure that that blockchain is stable at that point. So you might wait up to an hour for £1 million transaction. £1 million might, or $1 million might sound like a lot, but in banking transactions they happen every few seconds. Many times every second. While Bitcoins cannot be stolen, the private locks that give you access to them can. We talked about Mt. Gox earlier, we talked about another Bitcoin exchange earlier this year where people had those private locks be stolen. Worse than that, actually, you can lose your private lock. So a few years ago, someone lost, I think it was 21,000 Bitcoins because they had stored them on a hard drive and they threw, I kid you not, they threw the hard drive away with that private lock that gives him access to his or her Bitcoins into the rubbish. They then went to the rubbish site and tried to find that hard drive. They could never find it. Those Bitcoins are now gone forever. Yeah, it is beyond. It sounds really silly, but it's the same thing with money, right? If I drop this out of my pocket, I've now lost it forever. I'll never find that again. But this is taking it to a whole new digital level down the back of the sofa, back of the couch, lost. And ultimately, there will be deflation and there will be transaction fees in Bitcoin. So after 2140, you'll need to incentivize people to put your transactions on a blockchain, so that will require transaction fees. No one knows how big they will be. They should be a lot less than banks charge because actually it's just automatic, there's no human involvement. But you also get deflation as people lose Bitcoins, as Bitcoins, if I die with 1 million Bitcoins in my wallet and I don't pass them on to anyone, that's it, they're gone forever. Much more interesting to me, and my final proper slide of the day, is blockchain. Blockchain is actually the really interesting thing here. Bitcoin, I think it's a bit of a fad. I don't use it. I think there are better forms of money out there, but it's interesting. But blockchain, there are some really evolutionary uses of blockchain. So, first of all, banks. Almost every major bank in the world is now researching blockchain. And when I say every major bank, I've got a list of them here. JP Morgan, Citigroup, Barclays, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Credit Suisse, Bank of Scotland, UBS, Bank of Santander. The list goes on. Almost every bank you can think of is now collaborating to try and use blockchain. Because behind the scenes, as they do transactions between themselves, it's incredibly expensive. They have humans who check all their details. In the future, if they use blockchain, they could get rid of all of that back office rules and it could be done just through blockchain, through public-private technology. And actually, if Bitcoin was created to try and reduce transaction fees, now banks are adopting that technology to reduce their transaction fees. What's the point of Bitcoin anymore? Right? You can also use it for any other ownership, so intellectual property ownership is a good example. So if you own a painting, let's say you bought a nice Damien Hirst painting, right, and you want to check that is a real painting. Well, you know what? Damien Hirst and every artist in the world in the future is going to have their own public and private key. And on the back of the painting there will be a barcode, the digital signature, and I can check that that digital signature has been created with Damien Hirst's public key, and that will confirm that is his. And obviously that's a bit of an arbitrary example. You think about digital rights of music, selling music around the world, Apple Tunes, all these kinds of things. In the UK we've got a huge problem with land registry titles. Who owns plots of land? Who owns property? That's stored on thousands of pieces of paper. It takes lawyers a long time to confirm when you're selling a property that you own it and no one else has claim over that land. In the future, if you've got a ledger that has every bit of land in the country and the transaction chain of who owns it, no one can ever claim ownership of that land or fraudulently create a document that says that they also own that land. But that's just evolutionary. That's using the blockchain to create ownership and prove ownership. There are some really revolutionary ideas here. First one is self-executing programs. So instead of using a blockchain to keep a list of transactions, why don't we use a blockchain to keep a list of executable files, computer programs, where once a certain condition is met and I sign that transaction using my digital key, trying to come up with a good example of this. The only one I came up with is really morbid, so bear with me. Imagine I write my last will and testament, so when I die, my money will be distributed to my loved ones. I write that into a computer program, and it's stored on a blockchain of all the wills and testaments of everyone in the world. And when I die, that bit of the blockchain, it's signed, that transaction is signed by the coroner in the UK to confirm I died, and by my lawyer or by some public official to say, yes, he has died. And it automatically executes the code that transfers my wealth to my loved ones. Right? So you can suddenly start to do things and execute contracts automatically. Smart contracts are fascinating, actually. So you can have contracts where you need to agree that 2 out of 3 parties agree a job is done before someone is paid. You can write that on the blockchain. And finally, just one that came up last week. I was chatting to someone in MOH about rights access to data. So looking after patient records in healthcare, we were just talking about healthcare earlier, is really difficult. We've got patients' records, and these need to be given to appropriate healthcare professionals. If you walk into an accident and emergency, and you need a healthcare doctor to see that you are allergic to penicillin, you want them to have access to this. But if you walk into a local clinic, just for a standard check, you probably don't want them to have access to all of your medical records if it's not appropriate. You don't want anyone at any point to be able to just go in and have a look. And in the UK, it's a huge problem. We've got 1 million people employed by the National Health Service. Some people need access to your records at some times, some people do not. How do you manage that? Well, what you do is you put patient's detail onto a blockchain, like transaction for patient's details, and you say you can only decrypt them if you have the private key of that person's primary physician, or you have the private key of hospital's accident and emergency department, or you have 2 private keys from someone's physician and a consulting doctor. Lots of different ways you can work this. Honestly, the benefits of having self-executing programs, smart contracts, are so out there that people are coming up with new ideas that I will never think of myself. It's really, really interesting. Okay. Now, I think lunch is here, right? So, just to recap really quickly, we've talked about why does Bitcoin exist. There are problems with fiat currencies. There are problems with using money online, and there are benefits we've lost from commodity currencies that Bitcoin brings back. How does Bitcoin work? We've talked about how transactions use public-private key cryptography. We've talked about the transaction chain to make sure that actually you don't need to trust anyone. We've talked about blockchain and how creating blockchains is the same way as you mine Bitcoin. And finally, on the implications, we've had quite a good discussion actually about the pros and the cons of Bitcoin, but more interestingly, hopefully you find it more interesting, blockchain as a technology is great. So thank you very much. I suggest we get some lunch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. I really appreciate the explanation. I mean, I know a bit about blockchain and Bitcoin, but I think I get a little bit much more about it today. For those of you guys who are new to this, right, there is a sign-up list, right? So what we do is that every week we will broadcast our topics of discussion, and we run this every week, right? Next week I would have Charlie here sharing his experience, and Charlie is actually a banker from UOB Kenya. So he spends a lot of time actually raising funds for later stage companies, but he also has it as an app, so he's going to come to share. Next week I also get Cloak Apps to share about their startup, which is has to do with federated data security. And it's quite interesting because they have a platform for secure transactions, and what they did was that they went to a hackathon, and within 24 hours they actually built a verifier of a smart contract. Because can you imagine, right, if your codes are not correct in your smart contract, right, you're actually giving away money based on the code. So therefore they have a verifier to check, and that's based on their federated data security architecture, right? So I will make sure that they don't get too technical on the security side, right? So at least, you guys get a feel of what kind of security is required for the next generation type of systems, all right? Don't forget to put your name on the name list. We have a new QR code to actually take your attendance, right? If you guys don't like about it, tell Ting, right? Or tell us why you like what you you don't like about the attendance taking, because it's supposed to be easy, right? The first time you do is that you need to register, right? And basically the next time you come, you just take a picture of that, go to the website, and you automatically sign up for the next, or your email will be registered for all the main email blasts. Okay? So thank you very much again, Ravi, for spending time with us. Taking time off from your vacation, right? Pizza is here, right? I think Carol is already opening up the box for pizza. So thank you again for coming. See you guys next week.